Alright, ghouls and Garys, so after NV Ranger and Company's last assignment studying the railroads of the Mojave, I happened upon a track that leads all the way to the Capital Wasteland. I returned that information to a trusted and more importantly wealthy employer who decided to send me out that way to study the towns of the Capital Wasteland and decide which of those were best suited for living. We have done this previously for the towns of the Mojave as well as the neighborhoods surrounding Vegas, but if you're new to the process, here's how we carry out things. We're going to go to each town and inspect it for 10 different categories or 10 different qualities. We have housing. Is there a doctor? What's the trading like? Is there a clean source of water? Is there food? What's the safety and defense like? Is there leadership? What's the community like? What's the potential for work? And what is the potential for growth? If you enjoy the work we're doing over here at NV Ranger and Company, please consider taking the time to subscribe, like or dislike, and comment on the video. It helps out a lot. Upselling aside, we have 16 different towns to get to within the Capital Wasteland. I forgot how many different settlements there are, and there are technically more settlements than is included in this video. We're trying to stick to what roughly could be considered a town. I'm sure you could make arguments for other locations though. We will be going in alphabetical order in giving our assessment for each location, and we will comprise a ranking or a tier list, if you will, that will eventually at the end give us a final idea as to what the best and worst places to live are. The initial ranking is not the final ranking. Towns will be adjusted around throughout the video relative to how other towns fit into the rankings. Last bit of housekeeping, this is considered under the context that you, the human version of yourself, is being plopped into the Capital Wasteland and picking the best place to live for survivability and quality of life. You are not the lone wanderer. For the purposes of this video, the lone wanderer does not exist. They're not coming to save the day. Aww. It's just you and the rest of the people that live in the Capital Wasteland. The first town I stopped by was the location of Andale, which is based off of the real life Andale near DC. So for housing here, we have really just about nothing. All of the empty houses are destroyed. Outside of that, we have Old Man Harris's house, a single-story home, and then we have the Smiths and the Wilsons' house, both two-story homes and a garden shed out back. There is no doctor here, although all of the residents know the human body inside and out. There is no trading here as caravans avoid this location as if inbred cannibals lived here. There is no clean source of water. It is just irradiated, but that's pretty consistent throughout just about every location in the Capital Wasteland. The only option on the menu for food turns out to be people, but I did find one mute fruit on the back of someone's house. At least you have options. When it comes to safety and defense, there is a strange reputation of disappearances in Andale, and on the bright side, raiders avoid this town because of the stories around it. For leadership, you have two family heads, Bill Wilson and Jack Smith. The community is comprised of some friendly nuclear-style families who also happen to be inbred cannibals, if you didn't catch that yet. The Johnson family was cut. This was an additional third, technically fourth family, and it's kind of odd because some of the characters in town do mention 4 families living here, but there's really just 2 plus an old man. That old man used to have a wife, but it seems that she was eaten. Now, via the wiki, it says the Johnson family was cut as in cut content, but I also suppose that it is possible they were cut as in cut up into little pieces. For potential work, you could help them find more people to eat, I suppose. And then for potential growth, none really. I mean, everyone wants to stay away from this place, and beyond that, inbreeding can't be healthy for the future of this community. Technically, the denizens of Andale won't be directly hostile towards you in-game, but you also can't really move in here in-game. You're just kind of a guest around them, and as long as you aren't rude, and perhaps even if you're a bit accepting of cannibalism, if you join in a bit, they'll be quite nice to you. But considering what happened to Old Man Harris's wife, you're not exactly safe just because you join the party. I think what's more likely is that if a plump and juicy modern person shows up to a wasteland town full of cannibals, it's pretty likely that you'll get eaten, you'll go to sleep one night, and you won't wake up. So this is definitely going to go straight into F tier. Beyond that, like I said, there's not really even a house for you to move into. I suppose you could could build a metal shack or something on the edge of town, but really there's not any potential here. There's no potential for work. Again, caravans, trade, everybody else aside from the cannibals that live here avoid this place. Old Man Harris is supposedly not a cannibal, although we don't know whether he ate his wife or the other residents ate his wife. And who's to say that you don't kill all the other residents? Old Man Harris seems happy and he's like, oh, now it'll just be me and all these kids and I'll raise them. I'm suspicious. I think he might eat those bodies and those kids, so let's stay away from Andale. Now we can move on to Arefu, the town that sits on top of a highway overpass. For housing, Arefu has two real options. There's one abandoned residence not on the bridge, so you're a bit excluded, you're a bit vulnerable, and you might get attacked. That's not to mention the fact that there are Brahmin right next to this town that are dead and rotting, and it's said that they were attacked by a group known as the Family, so you're really not in a good position out here. Beyond that, you could move into the west residence given there are only dead people inside, so you can go ahead and move those dead people outside, and then you have a decent residence with 3 beds to yourself. Again, there's no doctor in this town. This is something I don't understand. I feel that people should just be huddling around locations with doctors, because if not, a small infection or a little cold could turn into something that ends up killing you. And then for trading, this does happen to be a stop point on the trading caravan circuit, so we got a good thing there. When it comes to a clean water source, we don't even have a water source. There's not an irradiated water source. This makes sense, I suppose, given they're up on the overpass, so there's no pipes running up to this location. I guess they could go down below the bridge where there is a river. That's heavily irradiated though. I'm not really sure how people are drinking here outside of getting water from those caravans. The same is true for a food supply. They did, as I said, have Brahmin in a pen just outside of town, but they're all dead and rotting, so not even their meat is useful. For safety and defense, again, the highway overpass becomes relevant, especially because one side of it is destroyed, so it's only accessible from one direction, and then they have various amounts of sandbags and tires to barricade the entrance. None of that seems to be helping much at all, because it's said that the population has dropped from 30 to 5 in recent years. They've been suffering attacks from the group known as the Family, as I stated, which are a group of wannabe vampires. We'll get to them later. And then they're also attacked by slavers. There's really nothing good going for this town in the way of safety and defense. You do have the leader, Evan King, this crazy kook standing on the edge of a bridge with a grenade rifle, but he hasn't seemed to have helped too much. And again, the community is just a group of shut-ins locked in their homes. And I also want to ask, how on earth did 30 people live on this bridge? It's only supporting 5 right now, and it seems to be at near capacity outside of that one abandoned home within town. So where were the other 25 people living? I mean, the west residence, so you had 2 parents, that brings you to 7. And then Ian and his sister Lucy, that brings you to 8, 9. Where are the other 21 people coming from? I guess it doesn't matter where they come from, it matters where did they go, and where did they go? They left. They either died or they got the hell out of this place. Really not a good sign for the town. For potential work, you could help deal with the family, either kill them or make a deal with them, and then you could also maybe start a ranch in that abandoned home, although it seems that you would probably just get raided and killed. And again, if you make a deal with the family, that becomes inhabited by a member of theirs known as Alan, who helps defend town, and a part of the deal involves the townsfolk taking blood out of themselves and giving it to these people. Sounds like a bad idea. Seems more like that you're letting the fox into the hen house, if you will. And finally, we get to the potential for growth. Again, just to reiterate, we went from 30 to 5. So this place is not growing, it's dying, and it's dying fast. This is going to go into F tier. There's no plumbing coming up to the homes. There's minimal housing. You're incredibly endangered just by entering the town. We will put it to the left of Andale though. Anything to the right of another town in a category is going to be considered slightly worse. The town furthest to the left in each tier is the best of that tier. I know some people might be thinking, oh come on, Arefu, it's cozy, it's cool, it has a name. No, look, you're in a really bad place if you're in this town. There are dead people inside of the town that the town leader didn't even know about. Their son, who killed them and drank their blood, was communicating with the leader of the group that has been attacking them. And the leadership of this town, Evan King, didn't do anything about that. He didn't see the connection there. I know you might not think like, oh yeah, he's definitely gonna go kill his parents, but you should be questioning that guy, pressing him for information. Beyond that, Evan King, the solo guy in town, the only one who lives alone, lives in the biggest house. Bad leadership, bad community, bad potential for work, bad safety and defense, no food, no water, at least you have trading, I guess, no doctor, and minimal housing. This is F tier. You have dead people in town, again, and dead Brahmin just at the edge of town. Horrible place. We are off to a great start here in the Capital Wasteland. let's see if we can turn things around with Big Town, the place where everyone is 16, miserable, and terrified. Not everyone is 16, but this is the town where all of the 16-year-olds who get kicked out of Little Lamplight, the settlement of children, end up going to, or usually come to. So for housing, we have a common house with 4 beds inside, we have a clubhouse with 3 beds and a couch, we have a town hall with no beds, but beyond that, we do have 3 boarded up homes within the walls that could be open for use. We have 10 more boarded up homes outside of the walls that make up the larger part of this neighborhood. This is by far the best housing situation so far. Now for a doctor, we actually had one. We kind of have one in Red. Unfortunately, Red has been captured by super mutants and is locked up in the Germantown police station, again, surrounded by super mutants. Real life scenario, you try and go save her, you're just gonna get yourself killed. For trading, again, once more relevant, there is not going to be a caravan stopping here until that super mutant threat is removed. For a clean water source, there's no clean water, but at the very least we do have irradiated water. For food, we have a maize farm. For safety and defense, we do have a bit of a makeshift wall that also has barbed wire on it and some sandbags set up near the entrance. They are surrounded by a moat, not really, there's really just a puddle of irradiated water in the front of town that a bridge runs across. We do have a guard at the front of town, and there is 1 broken sentry bot and 1 broken protectron. Now in game, if you repair one of those, the townsfolk will help repair the other. Hopefully you have some robotics experience, but now to get to the negative sides of things, there are slavers that attack this place, and once again, super mutants that attack this place. They kill people or they abduct them. It's really bad. Everyone is stressed out and confused. They need help. Luckily, there is a leader. Unfortunately, that leader was the doctor, Red, who is captured by the super mutants. So in order for there to be a doctor, trading, and a leader, you need to go deal with those super mutants. For the community, as I stated earlier, it's a group of teens and young adults that have been kicked out of Little Lamplight largely. For potential work in Big Town, you could help fix up those robots if you have the skill, maybe even help out with the maize farm or start another farm, expand their crop options, maybe get some Brahmin for ranching. Beyond that, you could help guard the town, and maybe if Red does end up back in town, you could help her out in the clinic. Now let's consider the potential growth. For there to be any growth, we need a miracle to happen. We need a home run. We need a bunch of things to line up perfectly so we can shoot our shot and give Big Town a chance. Here's what I mean. Let's say you choose Big Town. You go there. You're gonna hide out in town for a while. Maybe weeks pass, maybe months pass. Maybe you die in that time period, maybe you don't. Maybe you can stay safe and sort of shell up in town. Let's say, hypothetically, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Outcasts, the Enclave, slavers or raiders even, come into conflict with the super mutants at the Germantown police station and kill enough of them, weaken them to get them to move, or it leaves only 1 or 2 of those super mutants there at that location. Maybe you round up a couple of the townsfolk to go save Red, or maybe she is able to sneak out and make her way out through the cell that she's locked in somehow. If the town can get Red back, all of a sudden things can look up for Big Town, especially if the super mutant threat is largely removed. Then you have a lot of the foundational components that many of the other towns in the Capital Wasteland don't have. You have a doctor, you have trading, and beyond that you'll have a sufficient leader. Not to mention the town does have a farm going, and they do have sufficient housing options and potential in housing. If, and it's a big if, those things happen, I think there could be a lot of potential in Big Town. Other people that aren't 16-year-old kids coming from Little Lamplight might show up to this location, given that there is a doctor and food here. If the town were to grow, they could expand to the houses in the surrounding neighborhood, and we could see something of a decent location that could grow to the size of something, maybe a decent bit smaller than Megaton or Rivet City, but a good bit larger than most of the other settlements. That's all wishful thinking though. The reality is now that multiple groups, super mutants who maybe don't consider this too much, and slavers certainly do consider this, that the town is comprised of a bunch of children that are terrified, panicked, and they don't actually know how to defend themselves too well. I just think you're putting yourself in a horrible situation, and without a doctor or anything like that, it'd be easy to just take a stray bullet and end up dead if you don't end up in slavery or in a super mutant's mute fruit soup. So you're gonna go in F tier here, but again, we're gonna put it to the left of Arefu Arefu because at the very least there aren't dead people in town. Beyond that, Arefu is dealing with the same threats that Big Town is. Maybe the super mutant threat isn't as direct, but it's still certainly potential, and they also have the family threatening them, so really bad place. Again, I'm just gonna keep picking on Arefu. Okay, so we have 3 towns in F tier right out the gate. Next up we have Canterbury Commons. Now when you enter this place for housing, you'll see there are 10 large boarded up buildings. These aren't the small suburban homes that surround Big Town. These are legitimately sized buildings that are pretty close to the urban section of DC. Yes, some of them are partially destroyed, but so are some of the buildings that are already in use. If you even go ahead and look inside Uncle Ro's house, you can see that there are many sections of this building that are closed off due to rubble collapsing through. For trading, we have a pretty decent situation here, especially when compared to the previous towns. We have Joe Porter in a Dot's Diner, and then we also have it being a stop point for caravans. Now, Canterbury Commons is meant to be a bit of a trading hub for the Capital Wasteland, and it was originally supposed to have an open-air bazaar in the cul-de-sac with various traders just outside of town, but this was unfortunately cut. We don't have a clean water source here, but we do have an irradiated one, and for food, we have 3 Brahmin in a Brahmin pen, a maize farm, and again, Joe's Diner. For safety and defense, we do have Dom, who acts as a bit of a sheriff, and Machete seems perfectly capable of helping him out, but the more interesting aspect to this town's safety is the antagonizer. Now, the antagonizer technically wants to destroy the town, but as the people of town will note, she's not really that dangerous and neither are her ants. She's not a real threat, but the story of her, what is known about her throughout the wasteland, actually scares raiders off, so she's kind of indirectly helping the town. Unfortunately, there aren't real town walls set up, but we do have a lot of rubble and debris from large destroyed buildings that cover portions of the surroundings. Now for leadership, we have Uncle Ro, who was one of the founders of the town, along with his sister, who was killed by raiders in the past. And then it's also worth noting that Dom, as the sheriff, does act as a bit of a leader as well. Him and Ro seem to get along. The community is actually quite small, especially when you exclude the mechanist and the antagonizer, but they are a pretty friendly bunch. They seem very welcoming, especially when you compare them to the other towns of the Capital Wasteland. So for potential work, given this is a caravan hub, you could do business with them, maybe even hop on with one of them. You could deal with the mechanist or the antagonizer, but that's more of a short-term thing. You could help with the Brahmin pen or maybe even the farm. And lastly, I think it's not a bad idea to try and start a small business in one of these abandoned buildings. Maybe you can scrap what you can from nearby locations and then try and get discounts from some of the caravans that pass by so that you can set up a bit of a business within the town, especially since it's possible to work with Uncle Ro and help organize the caravans. So if you can figure out a deal with them, you could get yourself in a good situation here. Finally, for the potential for growth of Canterbury Commons, I think the town right now should be taking advantage of the situation with the mechanist and the antagonizer. Again, their presence is a bit of a problem. I think it's holding the town back largely, but it is keeping it relatively safe. So before the town puts an end to their nonsense, they should use this grace period to really bolster up their defenses. Once that has been dealt with, Ro can use his connections to the caravans to help make this place much more of an actual trade hub, and maybe he could even use his connections through the caravans to reach out to the doctors of the wasteland and convince one of them to stay in Canterbury Commons. And again, we have all of these boarded up but ready to use buildings in town. So I think Canterbury Commons' potential for growth is huge, and its setup right now isn't bad. It's not hugely dangerous. There's a decent community about. You have good leadership, a farm, and a Brahmin pen. So I'm gonna put Canterbury Commons into B tier for now, but I could see it sliding up or sliding down depending on how things proceed. For our 5th town, we arrive at the little dink hole of Girdershade, which only has 2 houses and they are occupied. There is no doctor in town, there is no trading in town, and caravans don't come this far out. They're pretty unknown. There is no water, none. I don't know how they're drinking at all. There is a Brahmin in a pen, and they do have a maize farm. Again, how do they water that maize, and how do they give that Brahmin water? How do they drink water? How are they alive? I guess they are surviving off of Sarah's Nuka-Cola. She runs the Nuka-Cola Museum, so they are loaded up with radiation and diabetes, no doubt. For safety and defense, they do have some junk walls set up, and it's also said that Ronald Lauren is a decent fighter. Lauren, whatever. They also seem to assume that because they're such a small settlement and so far out of the way that nobody notices them, so they don't have to worry about raiders, although they are very close to the Evergreen Mills raiders, so I feel like they're playing with time a bit. Eventually somebody's going to notice them there and come take them out. It's also possible for creatures such as giant rad scorpions or yaoguai to come into town, so they're really not that safe. You have the Nuka-Cola smell, the Brahmin smell, something's going to attract a yaoguai there. There's not really a leader in town. I suppose Ronald follows around Sarah with his tongue to the ground, so you could say her. She also runs the Nuka-Cola Museum, as we stated. We only have 2 people and a Brahmin to make up the community, and then for potential work, you could get some work at the Nuka-Cola Museum, gathering different relics and Nuka-Cola Quantum as she sends you out for in the game, and it looks like they built the shacks they're in, so maybe they could help you build a 3rd shack, grow the town a little bit. You could work at that for a while, help them out with the maze farm, maybe add a Brahmin to the fold. That speaks a bit on the potential for growth, which again has to be minimal. If raiders don't know they're there, how are other people in the wasteland going to know they're there? Caravans don't know, nobody seems to know. The only thing that would attract people is hearing about a Nuka-Cola museum, I suppose, which I'm not sure if you want to add those people to the community, but that's an option as well. They're out of the way, they're tucked under an overpass, so not a lot of potential for growth. This is a hard one to rank. So we do have food, we do have at least a liquid to consume in Nuka-Cola, but Ronald is very protective over Sarah. He seems a little crazy. So if you're a guy moving into town and you're hanging out with Sarah trying to get some of that Nuka-Cola, he might run you out of town, try and kill you, start a fight. It's not a great situation, but at the very least, it's not under attack or full of inbred cannibals like the towns down in F tier, so we're going to put Girdershade in D. For number 6, we have Grayditch. We'll keep this one short and sweet. It's the only town I can foresee, at least, going below Andale. It's Grayditch. This place isn't really a town. The only person there is a kid and Brian Wilkes. Everybody else is dead or a fire-breathing ant. So yeah, F tier, we don't even need to consider it, barely even a town. Little behind the scenes for you here. I originally recorded this video with a not available section. For that and some other reasons, I decided to re-record it, but Grayditch was one of the towns that was in that not available section. I decided to just scrap that tier because it's not as fun. We might as well consider all the towns, and if those detracting factors are so bad, just put them into F tier. This next town, Little Lamplight, was also in that not available section because you can't live here if you're over the age of 16, so that's going to be a major hit to it right out the gate. I'm sure many of you are aware of that. Now when it comes to housing, they live in a bunch of suspended wooden shacks within the Great Chamber of the Little Lamplight mines, and they also have some quarters set up in the dead-end corners of the caverns. This seems terribly unsafe, but it's something. They actually do have a doctor. She's a kid, obviously, but they have Lucy. That's better than nothing. For trading, we have Knick-Knack and then Eclair who sells food. There is no clean source of water, but they do have irradiated water. And then once again for food, they have Eclair. And then really what they're surviving on is human flesh-fed cave fungus, which also lowers radiation. So as disgusting as that sounds, it seems to be incredibly nutritious and beneficial for the post-apocalypse. Although safety is quite questionable given, rock structures falling from the ceiling of the cave and crushing you or getting caved in, they are pretty well defended tucked away in the caverns. It seems like the super mutants, Deathclaws, and other robots that can spawn or hang out around the front entrance could kind of end up protecting them because the entrance to their town is tight. It's difficult for a large creature to get into. So if there's a bunch of them hanging out outside, that might draw the raiders away. We also have 6 dogs inside to help protect the kids. How functional they are seems quite questionable. Unfortunately, the caverns are connected to Vault 87, and this means there are a bunch of super mutants that are already down there in the caverns. Not quite connected to the kids though directly. I don't know if they know of each other's existence, so it's not a huge, pressing, immediate issue, but it's something to consider. For leadership, they have the OG, Mayor McCready, and a community once again is a bunch of kids under the age of 16. For potential work, you could, kind of in Andale style, go collect human remains to help feed that cave fungus that keeps them going, But realistically, if you're older than 16, you're not allowed long-term stay, so it's hard to even consider work in this situation. Let's say you just turned 13, which I think is the cutoff point for you to even be watching this video. You have 3 years in this settlement at best, and then you're off to Big Town or wherever else. So for potential growth, here's a big question. How on earth do kids appear here? Like, how is the settlement even stable, let alone growing? I guess maybe kids who are orphaned in the wasteland and left to their own devices could show up and help keep the place somewhat populated, but it could also just be one of those Bethesda oversights. Kicking out everyone as they start to mature has to count against them for potential growth. Not only are they lowering their population each time they do that, they're not allowing for any fully developed brains to exist among them, so yeah, potential growth is bad. I'm going to rank this one below Girdershade in D tier, so further to the right. The reasoning behind this is I don't think that most of us are going to be allowed in. If you are within their age range of 13 to just before 16, you can be in there for a couple of years, but that's not great as is. It's really a short-term situation in the grand scheme of life. The only reason it's above the rest in F tier is that there's an argument you could make for convincing the kids using charisma, speech check or something for them to allow you in, saying, maybe you're a giant baby, you're not actually an adult, or maybe you could convince them that they should accept an adult, although their reasoning is pretty well set. There is a backstory as to why Little Lamplight is only allowed to be comprised of children. They have their purpose, so it's not an option. So our 8th town is perhaps the most beloved and most nostalgia-filled town of Megaton. For housing, it's a pretty bad situation because due to the density, many of the residents are actually forced to live in the common house, which is truly meant to be used for meetings and voting, that sort of thing. But with inside, we do have 8 beds. There is the open home, but we know via the game that is usually gifted after somebody has defused the bomb in the center of town. And then lastly, I suppose you could try and join the Children of Adam because their building does have 7 beds, and it seems they only have about 4 members. They do have a doctor in Dock Church, so that's pretty huge. And then trading, we have a decent situation. We have Moira, who's a general store merchant. There's Colin Moriarty and Gob, who sell drinks in their bar, or really Colin's bar. There's Jenny Stahl, who's a food vendor, and then it is a caravan stop point. For water, they do have a functioning water plant, but they only have irradiated water in town outside of what Wadsworth can give you if you do get into that empty house. He'll ration you off some bottles of clean water, but the water plant and the pipes throughout town are leaking really badly, so this is something that's kind of on the edge. If someone isn't capable of getting that water plant in good order, then we could have a situation where you have an enormous town that becomes entirely dependent on caravans for water, which is a horrible situation. The population would definitely drop. Again, for food, it isn't great. There's a single Brahmin in town, and we do have Jenny Stahl as a food vendor, but the soil is irradiated, so that prevents any farming from happening within Megaton. For defense, we have a decent situation in Megaton. You have these massive metal walls and the giant metal gate that are made out of the old planes from an airport that's been entirely scrapped to make this town. Then you also have the trifecta of Stockholm on a guard tower, Sheriff Lucas Sims, and then Deputy Weld helping defend the town. But unfortunately, I think some of the biggest risks are within the town. You have a nuke sitting in the dead center in a pool of irradiated water. I also have to make note of the fact that the town is made of a bunch of rusted metal. One little scratch and you're gonna need a doctor because you'll have tetanus in no time. One bad fall and you're impaled on somebody's house. You can have raiders, ants, or rad scorpions attacking the town, but they're not that much of a threat. Again, I think the biggest threats are within the town and people like Mr. Burke who want to set off that nuke. For leadership, you do have Sheriff Lucas Sims, and then you also have to consider Colin Moriarty, who's definitely pulling strings. He's a bit of a corrupt individual, certainly toxic on the community, and it's also potentially worth mentioning Confessor Cromwell, who leads the Children of Adam in town. For the community, it is a large set of very unique individuals. There's not sort of one core theme to tie them all together. The only location that is bigger in the Capital Wasteland, or settlement rather, is Rivet City. Due to that really high population, I think your potential for work and what we'll get to later in growth is pretty limited, because you could go help fix those water pipes if you have the knowledge and collect scrap metal for Walter at the water plant, but a lot of the roles within town are already filled. To expand upon this point, one of the things that was relevant if you saw the video that we did of the same nature for the Mojave and New Vegas was that you could live in one location, and because areas could be generally safe, you could go scrap or prospect in another location nearby beyond the borders or walls or limits of whatever settlement you were in. But in the Capital Wasteland in Fallout 3, that's a really dangerous idea. Leaving Megaton could just be your death. You could walk out and get hit by raiders, hit by some sort of wildlife. It's unpredictable, and going to any location is really dangerous. Given this difference, you're probably better off staying inside of the settlement of your choice, and that's really going to limit your options for the potential work. Your best bet might be to get some work with one of the businesses that already exists within town, although it doesn't seem like they need a lot of help. Maybe you could be an assistant for Doc Church. Moira also seems like a kind individual who might be able to offer you some work. Hopefully she's not asking you to flesh out that wasteland survival guide, because that will probably get you killed, but there might be something else for you to do. And it's a similar sentiment with the potential for growth. You have limited room, and there's not a lot of extra housing going around for new people to come into town. There's no farming. It's limited room for ranching as well. They only have one Brahmin. There's no pure water despite the enormous population. It's an old and damaged water plant that's keeping the town afloat, no pun intended. And then you have all this rust and old jagged metal everywhere. Now, we'll get to this later, but a part of the problem with Rivet City is that there's a ton of rust, and the population has respiratory issues as a result, so you could assume something similar is happening to the metal town sitting in a nuke crater. It also seems to be clear that Colin is hurting the town. He is a blight on the population. Maybe you could figure out a way to expose him, justify gunning him down, or getting him taken out by Sheriff Lucas Sims. Doesn't seem super realistic, but then if he's out of the picture, maybe you could take over the bar business in town. Treat your boy Gob a little better too. With all of those negatives considered, I'm gonna go ahead and put Megaton behind Canterbury Commons, but still in B tier. Again, the list is relative, so we have to consider the fact that it still has walls, water, food, all of those decent things, as well as a leader and a doctor, so bottom of B tier for Megaton. If you recall our time discussing Arefu, you'll remember the family who was attacking them. They are located in the Meresti Metro Station, and they do have a pretty decent settlement going on there. We can see here they have some makeshift bedrooms with some dividers for privacy, although all the beds that are currently accessible are over here, and they are not divided up or private, but maybe if you're there long enough you can get your own little setup going. There is no doctor here, but we do have trading in the form of Carl. I did notice a caravan passing by here. You might have to catch them because it doesn't seem like it's an actual stop point. There is irradiated water, no clean water of course, and for food, sort of an Andale situation, they drink human blood, so maybe that covers the water and the food at the same time. I also caught them eating what seems to be regular food, but maybe they just dip it in blood like ketchup. I think if you can manage to get in past their booby traps, you're in a pretty safe and well-defended section. The metro is cut off from all the other tunnels, so you're secluded. You can only get in through the Meresti train yard or in a radiated sewer from the Northwest Seneca station. They do have a guard standing watch closer to the entrance, and once again they do have those booby traps set up, so you might want to familiarize yourself with those as you come and go. The leadership is headed off by Vance and his wife Holly, and the community is comprised of the downtrodden, very strange folks who want to drink blood. They consider themselves vampires of some sort. So if you want to join this group, it seems like they do accept people and they're a little bit more trustworthy than the people of, say, Andale, but you're really going to have to get strange, get weird, maybe throw away some morals For the potential work, yeah, not really sure what you're going to do here. Their needs are going to be quite different than regular people. You might not have the same level of choice in work as you do at other towns, and the potential for growth could be pretty high given the state of the Capital Wasteland. There might be a lot of people looking to join a group like this, to be honest. This is another weird one to rank because I think if you can get here, get in, and convince them that you're down with their cause, you're in a really good situation. You got trading, you got water, you got some sort of food, and it seems very safe. Again, a big negative is that they don't have a doctor. Given the strangeness and sacrifices you'd have to make along the way though, that's gonna cap it off at C tier for me. Next up we have Oasis, and originally I thought this was gonna be one of the better spots, but I think it's in a bit more of a precarious situation than I initially gave it credit for. Now for housing, they don't really have specific housing, they just sleep in makeshift bedding under the canopy of trees they exist within. There is no doctor there, there is no trading, it's not even a caravan stop point, and unfortunately there isn't pure water. I thought there might be, but it all seems to be irradiated. The food situation here is fantastic. There is lush vegetation, there are supposedly birds and squirrels that live within the woods you could potentially hunt, you have maize, potatoes, carrots, mute fruit of the normal and crunchy variety, and I even found some apples growing on the trees. For safety and defense, you're tucked away in a rock-dense, hilly region with only a single path to the entrance and secluded and surrounded by a very dense forest. Beyond that, they do have front gate guards who use firearms. One negative that isn't a huge issue is down within the caves, there are a ton of mire lurks, so it's something to consider. They're tucked away down in the caves and there's a gate blocking them off. I don't think they can really access the topside area, but still, it's a danger. For leadership, we have Tree Father Birch and Leaf Mother Laurel, but the problem is they often argue and disagree with one another and end up ignoring Harold, the mutated tree. Harold is from the original Fallouts, but he eventually made his way to the East Coast where he was completely consumed and overrun by this tree growing out of his head, and now he is essentially the Oasis itself. Beyond Harold, the community is comprised of tree minders who worship Harold and Bob the Tree Mutant, or the Great One as they call him. They shun technology and tech progress, they favor nature, but like I said earlier, they do allow the use of firearms strictly for defense because the Capital Wasteland is a rough place. A potential issue to consider is that they rarely allow visitors in. Now, Harold has been telling them to let people in because he wants an outsider to come in and willingly kill him because he's suffering, he's just expanding and growing into this forest, it's dragging his organs all over the place, he can't move, he's miserable. They don't seem to see things his way, they don't want him to die, they might not let you in. You might walk all this way out to the Oasis and get turned away at the gates. For potential work, you could help tend to the crops that are here or guard the Oasis. They're pretty self-sufficient, but in terms of growth, it's pretty minimal because again, they're not looking to let a bunch of outsiders in, and there's one huge issue. The Oasis itself is growing. As Harold and his forest continue to expand across the region, it's going to draw the attention of other groups who might look to take this for themselves, or if it's raiders or slavers, they might just burn the whole thing down, and that has to be factored in to its rating. You're sort of in a bit of a ticking time bomb. Harold himself wants to die, so it's going to be up to you to not let him die if you want to keep the benefits of this settlement. And beyond that, if the forest continues to expand and you draw the attention of slavers, raiders, super mutants, and the like, then you're going to put yourself at risk, and this whole settlement could be gone very quickly. It's hard to say. I think we're going to put Oasis in B tier for now, behind Megaton because of the potential issues it has in the future. It's in a good state now though, and at least you don't have to start drinking people's blood. You can eat some pretty decent food here. Now we'll move on to Paradise Falls, which is definitely going to have some caveats to it, but we'll get through some of the categories first. So for housing, you have 10 beds in the Slavers Barracks. There's one building blocked by some debris with the door still visible. on the interior side of Paradise Falls. We also have multiple buildings that are abandoned in the exterior section, but many of those buildings are facing the wrong direction, as to say they are facing outside of the makeshift walls that make up that exterior, so you would have to go outside of the walls to get into those buildings, even if you could clear the rubble out from in front of them. They do have a doctor in Cutter, they do have trading in that it is a caravan stop point, and then you have Pronto and Frank, who is a slave bartender. For a clean water source, it's irradiated, there is no clean water. For food, there is one Brahmin in their Brahmin pen. For safety and defense, we do have makeshift walls and a spiked gate that can be lowered and raised, and there are guards on the exterior and within the settlement. For leadership, it's Eulogy Jones. Now this guy's a bit of a problem. He's willing to lie, cheat, and steal. He killed the last leader. It's really a might makes right type of leadership in Paradise Falls. The community is the epicenter of slave trade in the Capital Wasteland and the East Coast more generally. So it's really a hub of sorts, but they really value that evil or very evil karma. Now that's an in-game type of thing, but if we're thinking of a real life scenario, you're gonna have to prove yourself to be a pretty rough individual. And that's really the biggest thing holding this settlement back. You are going to have to toss your morals out the window, throw them away, goodbye. And beyond that, you're going to have to prove yourself to these people. For one, you have to pay your way or enslave your way into the settlement, one or the other. And then once you're in there, you have to show everybody that you're not just more slave material, because otherwise you're going to end up in the slave pen. And I think that's the most likely reality for all of us if we were to try and get into this settlement. The people here, the community of Paradise Falls, is looking to poke and prod and see what they can get out of you. And if you fail those tests, if you show them that you're a soft modern person who's not really into slavery, then you're probably going to end up in one of those pens or just getting killed. Again, this is just for the hypothetical, as they do have decent amenities within the settlement technically. For potential work, I think that's pretty obvious. You're going to be trying to get other people to do your work. And then for potential growth, this place could certainly continue to grow given the state of the Capital Wasteland. It seems like there might be more slavers, raiders, these types of people than there are regular people just trying to live decent lives. What does end up hurting it is the leadership in the community. They're not just going to be welcoming to newcomers, and they're certainly not going to let people just come in and set up shop in one of those abandoned buildings. So its potential growth is sort of a mixed bag. Given all of this, I'm going to put Paradise Falls in between Arefu and Andale in F tier. Your mileage may vary. Here we are with our 12th settlement at everyone's favorite, the Republic of Dave. So for housing, we have a men's quarters and a women's quarters, but unfortunately, you're not really allowed to join this settlement as anything more than a refugee. It is largely impossible to gain access to any of the beds or housing in the Republic of Dave. You're not really allowed to become a member. That's going to factor into its ranking, unfortunately. They don't have a doctor. For trading, it is a caravan stop point, and you can convince Shauna via speech, but you can't buy anything from her. You're just selling her artifacts as if they're relics to put in Dave's museum. It's really not a lot. As far as my inspection could find, there is no source of water in the Republic of Dave. Huge issue, not even an irradiated one. For food, there is a maize farm, and we do have a Brahmin pen with 2 Brahmin inside. And for defense, we have the Army of Dave, which includes Dave and Bob, and then a junk wall fenced in town. For leadership, we have Dave, of course, and he seems to have some Kim Jong-un type propaganda going on, like, as a baby, he never cried, and his poop didn't stink. I guess it does now, though. Interestingly enough, if Dave is voted out of office, he goes to Old Olney, which is infested with Deathclaws. If you go ahead and clear out Old Olney before he gets there, he does establish a new republic, but nobody really joins him. He just sits alone, and it's not an option to join him yourself. He will turn hostile if you prompt him over and over. Beyond that, upon entering town, he threatens to execute you for not calling him Mr. President, and he also threatens to execute you if you attempt to join his enclave. You're only allowed to stay if you suck up to Dave and provide tribute. For the community, it's only comprised of his family or his wives, which again is just sort of tied into his family. I don't know if incest is going on here, but it sure seems like it. If you somehow were allowed access, even though it seems nearly impossible to become a permanent citizen, at least under Dave's role, you could help guard the town, help out with farming or ranching with the Brahmin, maybe even teach in the schoolhouse if we can get Dave out of there and actually teach the kids something useful. And for potential growth, again, minimal. They don't really allow new people in, it's just Dave's family. The only recourse here, the only thing that could save it with potential growth and moving in is if you can get Dave out of office and get a more accepting leader in charge, and that's going to be the one thing that keeps it out of F tier, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in between Girdershade and Lamplight. It's above Lamplight for obvious reasons, but it has a similar issue with gaining access being very difficult, and when compared to Girdershade, they both don't have a doctor, they don't have any source of water, and they each have maize and a Brahmin pen. It does have a bit of a leg up on Girdershade in regard to having a caravan stop point and a decent sized population compared to Girdershade, although that could be the product of incest. Now we move into the final four, starting off with the largest settlement in all of the Capital Wasteland being Rivet City. For housing, we have the upper deck hotel room for a one-time purchase of 120 caps. There is no water available inside of this room, unfortunately, and then we also have a common room with 8 beds and a couch if you're desperate. We do have a doctor in Dr. Preston, and then Rivet City is probably the best location when it comes to trade. We have caravans and traders who are allowed to enter the town for free, and beyond that you have the Rivet City Market with Cindy Cantelli selling chems, Flack and Shrapnel selling weapons, Gary Staley's establishment which sells food, you have Bannon for clothing, Seagrave Homes for junk, Bell Bonnie for drinks, and then Vera Weatherly and Mr. Buckingham which sell food and drink from the hotel. There is no clean water source here, but we do have an irradiated source and a team of scientists working towards that purification project. For food, this is on par with the Oasis. You have a hydroponic set of gardens, which allows Rivet City to act as a supplier of edible non-irradiated food for the wasteland, and then the various vendors throughout Rivet City that sell food. For safety and defense, they are on an aircraft carrier in the middle of an irradiated river with an extendable bridge. They have a standing police force, guards that rotate through a 24-hour shift, and they are trained by Lana Danvers and Chief Harkness, who are veterans. They are experienced fighters, and the guards are also equipped with armor and automatic weapons. Unfortunately, you do have mirelurks infesting the lower sections of the ship, not too much of a pressing issue though, and you have threats from raiders and super mutants, but they can really cut themselves off from the outside world because of the bridge. For the safety though, I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about Megaton, the residents do suffer from respiratory issues due to the rust on the aircraft carrier and the regular maintenance work that needs to be done. Lucky for you, there's a doctor and a team of scientists on board. For leadership, it's under the Rivet City Council members. For the community, this is a city that's once again open to traders and travelers for free. It has a huge population, bigger than even Megatons, and it welcomes in new people as well. Unfortunately, that community is divided in class struggle. You have the hangar deck, which represents the lower class, and then you have the upper deck representing the upper class. For potential work, you could supposedly help the research team, although they might not be looking for that. You could join the town guard or even work for one of the businesses. I also noticed this one open tent in the market, so maybe you could even start your own business down there, although it seems like they have a lot of the trading options covered. There's also the mention of that maintenance work that's going on, so you could maybe teach yourself some of that stuff, get somebody to train you, or potentially you're going in with a background in that field anyway. For potential growth, it does seem that there's relatively minimal space left on the boat, but there's also a ton of open deck space, so maybe you could build shacks up there and expand upon the town. This would be especially possible if those hydroponic farms and whatever water system they have going on could support a growing population. We do have to make note once again of those respiratory issues potentially causing more long-term problems for the town, and the fact that Rivet City is really tucked away within the more urban DC sprawl, which is a very, very dangerous area. It's considered a war zone. You have the Brotherhood of Steel fighting super mutants. It's chaos. You might die just trying to get to this place. all things considered, this is almost undeniably the safest, most self-sufficient location in the Capital Wasteland. It's going into S tier for that. Its biggest issue are those respiratory problems, but you would definitely take respiratory issues and class struggle over starvation and absolutely no water, which is the case for many of the other locations in the Capital Wasteland, and no doctor as well. This only becomes further solidified with the fact that you have a team of scientists looking to generate purified water. I know that's a stretch given the Lone Wanderer is not here, but there's always a chance. Next up is the Temple of the Union, which is home to the faction of abolitionists who are fighting the good fight against the slavers of the Capital Wasteland. This is just a single, partially destroyed building sitting amongst a bunch of other absolutely destroyed buildings. The housing situation here is incredibly limited. There's a bunch of rooms, but none of them are open. They're in use by current residents. I suppose you could set up maybe over in this office area, but it looks like a crafting station. And then you also have the third floor, but that's fairly exposed. Maybe you could build a shack up there. There is no doctor. It is a stop point for the caravans, which is kind of funny. They stop at Paradise Falls and the Temple of the Union. There is irradiated water. They have a single Brahmin on the ground floor for food, but nothing approximating a farm as far as I can tell. Luckily, that could be supplemented by the caravans. For safety and defense, we do have the concrete walls of the building ruins. There's a gate out front and they're ready to guard it at all times. And then we have Fourscore the dog. There is a clear leader in Hannibal Hamlin, who is named after Abraham Lincoln's vice president. For the community, we have a group of escaped slaves and abolitionists again. And for potential work, you could help build further defenses, help guard the current Temple of the Union, and maybe tend to that Brahmin downstairs, but your options are going to be pretty limited because these people are really all stowed away within this building and hiding out from slavers, potentially targeting them. That bleeds into the potential for growth because there's not a lot of room here, but you could have a lot more escaped slaves showing up and looking for assistance. The minimal housing, minimal space, minimal food, all causes an issue. You could have overcrowding and problems from that. And again, all of the buildings around what is left in this area are completely leveled and destroyed. You would have to build makeshift housing on the outside, and that would expose you to the issues mentioned previously. There is the option to try and move the abolitionists to the Lincoln Memorial, which is in downtown DC essentially. This could be incredibly dangerous. You're going to have to fight through the metros infested with ghouls. You're going to have to fight the super mutants all over the place, and you're going to have to take the Lincoln Memorial, which by the time you get there is owned by slavers. Beyond that, I think there's a bit of a missed point. If you want to help the people who are enslaved within the Capital Wasteland, moving to a place that's very difficult for them to get to seems counterintuitive, so I don't see that as being a very viable option, even though it does open up the space a bit. It's also known that caravans don't go through the downtown DC area, so it would cut off their ability to trade as well. For the ranking of the Temple of the Union, I am going to go ahead and put it above Meresti in C tier. At the very least, you don't have to drink blood, and it has many similar amenities. Here we are at what would seem to be, at least on the surface level, a great settlement, Tenpenny Tower. For housing, look, it's very difficult to get into this place. They don't just let anybody walk in. You have to pass speech checks and things like that. It's known that Alistair Tenpenny, the leader of this settlement, is really picky about who he lets in, down to genetics. It also seems to be the case that there's minimal room left. Now, this is kind of strange because there's basically 3 floors in what seems to be a tower with many more than that, but you do get offered a suite after destroying Megaton. You have to go through with destroying Megaton though, so that's a real large barrier to entry. There is a doctor in Doc Banfield, and we do have a significant amount of trading, probably the only location that's comparable to Rivet City. You have Boutique Les Chic with miscellaneous items, Café Beaumont for food, the Federalists Lounge for drink, Gustavo's Armory for weapons, you have New Urban Apparel for clothing, and the Wellness Center for medicine. For clean water, this is the only place I found in the entire Capital Wasteland that had pure water access through the sinks. Unfortunately, the suite that you get for destroying Megaton doesn't have one of those sinks. You only can get water from Godfrey in there. He gives it to you the same way Wadsworth does in in Megaton, he just rations out bottles, but you can easily just walk into somebody else's room and drink from there. They probably wouldn't want you to do that though under the real life context, so it's a bit of a give and take. There is irradiated water throughout the rest of the tower. For food, we have the Cafe Beaumont as a food vendor, but there's not a whole lot going on outside of that. There's no Brahmin or ranching, there's no farm here. For safety and defense, we have the concrete walls that surround the entire tower and a guard at the front gate. There is the significant threat of ghouls who they have mistreated and berated over and over again, who, if eventually let into the tower, we know will kill every single human inside. You would be included in that, no doubt. For potential work, there's really not a lot. Luckily, you probably wouldn't have to work to get in here. I guess you could join the guard force or maybe help out one of the businesses if you needed or wanted. And then once again, its growth is really limited because of the space, bigotry, and elitism that's going on here. They really don't have a lot of room to add people anyway. Again, this is another hard one because of the questionable access, but if you do get in, you're in potentially one of the best settlements in the entire game. So for Tenpenny Tower, we're going to put this one at the bottom of C tier. To explain my reasoning here a bit more, again, I'm considering this at scale. If the majority of us are going to be denied access to the location, I have to factor that into its ranking. Finally, we have reached the last location we're covering in the Capital Wasteland, the Underworld, the town of ghouls who live under the Museum of History. And in stark contrast to Tenpenny Tower, the town of ghouls does let in humans, or smoothskins as they'll no doubt refer to you. They might be a bit untrusting though. For housing, similar to Rivet City, you can rent a room at Carol's place for 120 caps, and then it's yours. Check it out. It's not got a lot of privacy, but it's something. It's a room, kind of. We also have Dr. Barrows and his assistant, Nurse Graves, so that's a huge plus. For trading, we have Greta in Carol's place for food. We have Azurkal for drinks and chems, and then Tulip for weapons and clothes. Then when it comes to clean water, there is none. There's no pure water, but we do have irradiated water. Not a big issue for the ghouls that live here. For food, again, you have Greta, who's a food vendor, but if we cycle back to trading and combine this with food because it's relevant to both, caravans can't make it to this portion of the map because it's in the DC war zone. For safety and defense, that war zone actually ends up playing a bit of a benefit, at least to the ghouls. So super mutants leave them be, which kind of indirectly provides protection to them. This keeps out slavers and raiders and other groups that might try and attack and take advantage of the Underworld. We also have Willow, who patrols the exterior, and then we have the Brotherhood of Steel, who occasionally shoot at the ghouls, but they generally don't pursue them. They tend to just fire warning shots. They're not looking to kill. Similar to other towns, we have the Doctor as the leader, who is Doc Barrows here. For the community, again, they're okay with human visitors, but it's all ghouls. Oh, and they do have Cerberus, who's a Mr. Gutsy that's relevant to safety and defense as well. But again, nobody's really directly attacking the Underworld, so it's not too relevant. For potential work, they do have a need for scrap metal, so maybe you could skulk around the area, stay far enough away from the super mutants and collect some scrap metal to give to the community. That would make you worthwhile. Then again, similar to other towns with businesses, maybe you could get some work at the bar, the inn, the clinic, or maybe even the hairstylist. And for the growth of the Underworld, given it is difficult to access the area being in the DC war zone, it makes it really difficult for this place to grow. On the other hand, ghouls might have an easier time traversing the metros because the ferals won't attack them, I think. And I think that's one of the biggest detracting factors about this location is its placement. It's going to be very hard to get to safely. So for that reason, I'm going to put it above Oasis, but behind Megaton. It's stable, it's safe, it's better than most, but again, very hard to get to. And with that being said, we'll take a look at our current ranking setup, and I am going to go ahead and move Canterbury up into A tier because of its potential. We also have to consider the fact that Canterbury doesn't have good defenses and it doesn't have a good doctor in its current state. So to be fair to Megaton, I think it is reasonable to put it above Canterbury in A tier as well. Megaton has its problems. I have issues with the rust. I have issues with the nuke in the center of town that people are currently plotting to blow up. But again, it has some decent amenities going for it and people have been living there for quite some time now, so it's going to go in A tier. This is our final list. Rivet City is our only town in S tier, and I think that's fitting. There should only usually be one location in S tier. For A, we have Megaton and Canterbury. For B, we have Underworld and Oasis. Then in C we have Temple, Meresti, and then Tenpenny. D has Girdershade, Dave, and Lamplight. And F, the worst of the worst, are Big Town, Arefu, Paradise, Andale, and Grayditch. Generally, I would kind of expect the list to look a little bit more middle heavy, not bottom heavy, but given how inhospitable this area is, I think it's pretty fitting that F is just full of locations. Alright, it's time for me to take that long train ride back to the Mojave and get this information to my employer. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my list, and I'll see you in the comments.